Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really excited to talk to you all today about SOC 2. So I'm going to start off just brief agenda, things we'll cover. So start with some introductions. I just got a great one, so I'll kind of gloss over my background, but introduce you a little bit briefly to Vanta, then dive into the SOC 2 side of this, which I imagine is why you all are here today. So going through what is a SOC 2, how do you figure out if you need one? And then if you think you do need one, kind of moving into some of the logistics around that. So what is an audit? How do you get an audit? How much does an audit cost? And how much faster do you think your sales deals will close with the SOC 2? If that looks good. So it's kind of what I aim to cover. And then in terms of questions, so I'd actually love for this to be like kind of reasonably interactive, or as interactive as like a Zoom kind of panel presentation can be. So by that, what I mean is I'll stop kind of after each of these sections and take questions kind of through the chat, and then also aim to leave time at the end for general Q&A too. So I'll just say, please ask questions along the way at the end, but would love, again, for this to be sort of as interactive as possible given the format. That all sounds good. Start diving in. Cool. Okay, so to start, y'all just got a great introduction of me, so won't spend a lot of time here. Kind of useful things for the purposes of this. Co-founder and CEO of Vanta. Tell you more about Vanta in a moment. As Maureen mentioned, prior to Vanta, I worked on Dropbox Paper as the first PM. This is actually where I ran into SOC 2. So I don't have a security or compliance background prior. I was actually the PM who belatedly learned they needed a SOC 2 after kind of reasonable time to get one had elapsed. So in some ways it was sort of a rude awakening into the security and compliance world, but ended up teaching me a lot, especially at the pain companies face in getting them. And again, as Maureen mentioned, started my career at USV in New York. Venture is great, but I really wanted to build things. So took that path a few years ago. Great. And then moving on, just brief introduction to Vanta. So our tagline here, automated security and compliance, starting with a SOC 2. So we have about 500 customers, about 40 employees, and about 2.5x customer growth since COVID and since shelter in place began. So kind of separately from the SOC 2 world. Anyone wants to talk about, hiring, onboarding, training remotely, growing a team in this weird year that we're all in. I'm super keen to talk about all of that as well, just separately. And then I just kind of screenshotted this piece of our website, kind of trying to explain how Vanta works. This is really high level, but just what automated SOC 2 means is, we ask for read access to your tools and infrastructure. So like AWS account, GitHub account, G Suite account, etc. You can kind of customize Vanta to your company, tell us what you want to check. And I'll get into later in the presentation how that's relevant to SOC 2. But then we can give you a to-do list of things you actually need to go check, so you can check them, fix them, and then we partner with auditors to get you an actual audit. If that 4-step process doesn't make a lot of sense, I hope it will by the end of the presentation. But just putting it up here to kind of frame what Vanta is, and also hopefully this also makes sense, but again, we sort of built it from first principles, from learning how the SOC 2 world works for startups. So hopefully that comes through too. And with that, kind of move into the first piece here. So what is a SOC 2? Which is a very reasonable question. I get this a lot, actually. So a SOC 2 report shows your prospects or customers that your company takes security seriously. Like, that's sort of its purpose. And some of you, as you're selling or as you aspire to sell to larger companies, you probably have to go through security review or some process by which that bigger company asks, like, hey, are you guys secure? And then sometimes they're, even more direct and say, hey, small startup or smaller company than we are. If we give you a bunch of data, will you leak it all over the internet? Like, what are you doing with our data? We're very concerned about this. And so for those of you who've had this conversation, you probably kind of do the things that startups do in response, where you say, hey, I promise I'm super secure. Hey, we try really hard to protect customer data. Our engineering team's really good. Here I can put my CTO on the phone who can speak very elegantly about our security practices. Maybe, hey, we went to really good schools and we have such shiny backgrounds, you can totally trust us, right? But some part of this is just some conversation where the big company is trying to figure out if they should trust the startup. And the startup is being like, you can totally trust me. I will not pull an Equifax and leak all your information all over the internet. So there's a lot of ways this can go, but like it kind of takes a lot of time and energy, especially when you have to do it for every single big company you sell to. So in comes a SOC2. So the idea of a SOC2 report is it's like a general answer. It's saying, hey, we have this report, like literally we have this long PDF that someone wrote for us. We are secure. We had someone else, an objective third party, come in and look at our security practices. They wrote everything we do up. You can read about it. There's like 50 pages of stuff you can read. Like we're in really good shape as a startup. You can trust us. And so that's kind of what it is, right? Like sometimes we compare it to the Common App, like in college applications, but it's just supposed to be like the one, process and audit you go through and one document. And then in theory, you can send it to any company you're trying to sell to, any prospect, and they can see that you were kind of mature enough and reasonable enough to go through this whole audit process and get good results on the other side. So that's kind of like what it is and why it ends up being useful, especially for startups trying to prove their credibility with bigger companies. And then just last bullet, it's just, SOC2 is also nothing more than a standard. It was created by the American Institute of CPAs. And there's sort of a longer historical story that if anyone is interested about, please ping me, where how CPAs ended up checking technical security, but they do. And so the only way you can get a SOC2 is to work with a CPA or a CPA firm, at least. So that's just also something to keep in mind. So hopefully this was helpful in kind of what a SOC2 is, somewhat philosophically, and like what purpose it serves. I'll also just show you part of one. So this is part of Vanta's SOC2. This is our table of contents. Our SOC2, so I sort of mentioned this, but it's literally a 50-page PDF, right? And the 50-page PDF has 4 sections, right? So we can go through the sections. So section 1, the Independent Service Auditor's Report. So you might be wondering, what does that mean? So this is basically the auditor saying, hey, the company's in good shape. They use much bigger words than this. It takes longer. There's a lot more detail. But fundamentally, it's the auditor saying, hey, I looked at a bunch of stuff. And if everything they told me is correct, I think they're in good shape per this SOC2 standard that we agree on. So that takes a few pages. Then section 2, so a few more pages. We have an assertion of Vanta's management. And again, this could be Rocket Ship's management, it could be your company's management, but this is literally Vanta's SOC2 report that I'm using, right? So what's this saying? This is us saying, hey, the information we gave the auditor is accurate. Like, we're not lying here. We gave the auditor all the stuff. So given we gave them correct stuff, and they're saying they feel good if we gave them correct stuff, we think you should feel good. So we have 2 pages on that, literally. Again, much fancier language than I'm making it out to be, but that's fundamentally what it is. Then we have section 3. So this one's a bigger, like 15 pages. So we have Vanta Inc.'s description of its Vanta platform as of this date. So what's this? This is basically us, or the company, writing about the security practices, right? So this is a company saying, hey, in, again, 15 pages of words, so lots of words, I'm going to describe to you all the things we do to keep the company and the application, or the platform here, but like the application in good secure shape. So here's just kind of narrative text about all that. So that's what, 15 pages or so. Then the last section, and this is like the meat of the report, this is about 25 pages. We have the trust service categories, criteria, and related controls relevant to security and processing integrity. So sort of a mouthful, but fundamentally what this is just actually 25 pages of tables and like mini table cells, call it 100 table cells about specific things that Vanta does. And I'll show an example in a bit, but basically the way this is structured is there's a commitment. So we could say something like, Vanta keeps customer data securely, or Vanta securely stores customer data. So that's sort of like the headline on one of the tables, something like that. And then there's rows underneath, and the rows are like specific ways that we keep this customer data secure. So we could talk about encryption and various things. We could talk about all sorts of stuff. But basically it's just, hey, here's 3 or 4 ways we uphold that commitment. And then next to it, you have the auditor saying, I saw them do this, or I didn't see them do this. And again, the words, the processes are a bit more complicated than I'm making them out, but like fundamentally that's what this is. And so again, like the meat of a SOC 2 report, or about half of it, are these just lists of commitments you're making and then ways you're upholding them. And then an auditor's saying, I saw that, or I checked and I like didn't really see it, or I checked and it was like sort of spotty. And that's what a SOC 2 report is. And so the idea is when you have this, you can show it to your customers or your prospects. And again, they read the whole table in theory, and they can see all the commitments you're making, all the ways you're upholding them, and all the things the auditors thought too. So this is kind of like what a SOC 2 report is. So I noticed we had a few questions in. I'm going to take a look at those. And if you'd like to ask other questions, please just drop them in the chat. And I'll pause for a moment for questions here. So if I can in fact find my mouse. One sec, it's gonna be a little complicated. Oops. Great. Okay, sorry. Great, okay, so we have Monica who says, to confirm, SOC 2 is optional but useful? Are there situations where customers, partners, regulators would require a SOC 2? Ooh, great question. I am going to mostly answer this on the next slide, but to just tee it up, a SOC 2 is in fact optional. So there's no government regulation, there's no industry certification, there's nothing that says you have to have a SOC 2 as a business. It ends up being de facto almost required, but that's at your customer level or your prospect level. So for example, it might be, hey, the company you're trying to sell to requires you to have a SOC 2. So in order to sell to them, you need a SOC 2. But it's not true that you need one to sell to people in Brazil, or you need one to process credit card data or anything like that. That's not it. Cool. Okay, great. Then we have another question from someone anonymous who asks, do all accountants provide this service, and how much does a report like this typically cost? So two-part question. On all accountants providing this service, no. It's kind of like anything else, right? Like a lot falls under accountants. So some firms specialize in financial accounting. Some specialize in the SOC 2 world, which is often called IT attestation or IT audits. Some firms do both, but really just depends on what firm you're talking to. And then second part of that question, how much does a report like this typically cost? So I'll get into this, but again, the high level answer, and I'll break it out, but you're probably looking at somewhere between $10,000 and $80,000 all in, depending on a bunch of stuff. I know that's a big range. I'll break it down in a few slides. Great. And then Sean asked, as a company that's recently gone through both PCI and HIPAA audits, are there any notable areas of a SOC2 audit that stand out that would not be covered by these other areas? So good question. There's a more complicated answer. The short answer is, if you've gone through PCI and you've gone through HIPAA, you're well positioned to get a SOC2 audit. You don't get it for free. The overlap isn't 100%, but you've probably done 60 to 70% of the work that you need. In contrast to something like HIPAA or PCI, and so sort of getting into the weeds, SOC2 tends to have more controls around how the company operates. So that's probably the gap of things you'll want to fill, but overall you're in a good position. Cool. Okay, I'm going to pause on questions. Oh, actually one more, just from Brian. Brian, I'm actually going to fold your question into the next slide. But okay, pausing.
I'm not sure.
And there's Alexa. So, okay, moving on. So we talked through what a SOC2 report is. Great. Okay, now, next question. You know what it is? Do you need one? So again, high level answer here, but if your prospect won't buy without a SOC2, you probably need a SOC2. And I don't mean to be like facetious here, but this is often because it's not a government regulation, because it's not, you know, an actual industry certification, your customers or your prospects, like your target market, is really your best guide here. And so one thing at Vanta we encourage companies to do when they come to us and ask, hey, should I actually get a SOC2? Or someone told me I need one. I don't even really know what it is. Like, what is, like, should I keep going? We say, hey, can you do some simple spreadsheet math? Really simple. Like, is there one deal that you want to close and you need to get a SOC2 to do it, and the value of the one deal is more than the SOC2 cost? In which case, probably want to think about doing it, right? And value of the one deal, this could be deal size. So this could be one of those, hey, you're going to spend $20,000, but you get $200,000 on the other side, like good trade sort of things. Or it could be a lighthouse logo thing. So to give one very specific example here, Slack, like Slack Inc., if you want to be a Slack vendor, they will ask you for a SOC2, and they don't like to let you get around that, let a vendor get around that. So we've helped a lot of companies sell to Slack at Vanta, and sometimes I think the dollar value of these deals are more than the SOC2, and sometimes it's not, but the startup is just like, look, if Slack is my customer and I can put that on my webpage, that gives me so much credibility with other buyers that I'm going to make the trade. So that's the kind of value of one deal point. The other sort of longer term things, where if you have a sales leader or head of sales or someone, they might keep track of this, if only out of frustration, is if you can sum up the value of all deals that, you know, you lost to security requirements, and like, what is that? And is that more than what a SOC2 costs? In which case, again, you have this pretty good ROI calculation where you can say, hey, a SOC2 costs, again, I'm going to use $20,000, costs $20,000, but if we'd closed all this new business, we would have gotten $60,000. Doesn't this feel like a good trade to everyone, right? And then the last piece of spreadsheet math is the value of all deals slowed to security requirements greater than the SOC2 cost. So again, this is a little fuzzy, but let's go back to the example and say, okay, you know, SOC2 costs $20,000. Not something we want to do just kind of on our own. But if we add up how much longer it took reps to close these deals, and like, let's say we closed $60,000. So again, we don't have the 20 versus 60 thing, but we actually closed these, but it took reps, we think, 3 times as long. So they were still, you know, working on this stuff and couldn't go work on other things. So it like slowed down sales velocity, not very efficient, like we don't feel great about this. Then there's an argument to be made there and say, hey, we could have done this much faster. These reps could have closed these deals and moved on and closed another set of deals if we had had a SOC2. So this is how we, advise folks to think through it. I'm going to come back to Brian, who asked a question previously. So Brian's question was basically, how should I think about a SOC2 versus other alphabet soup acronyms? ISO 2701 was the one he suggested, which is sort of the other one. I can talk through the differences between SOC 2 and the different standards. But honestly, the best way, well, I guess then there's that way, which is like, hey, you like kind of as an entrepreneur, understand the different standards, understand who wants what, and make your business decision, which is totally a thing you can do. It's a mini research project, but like it is tractable. Google is wonderful. You can figure it out. The other way, honestly, is just ask your prospects, right? Ask them and say, hey, you know, if they ask you for a SOC2, you can say, hey, would you accept ISO? Would you accept this other thing? If they send you a questionnaire, like one of those terrible spreadsheets, you can ask them, you can say, hey, I'll fill this out for you. Ugh, but like, I'll fill it out for you, right? I want to get the deal done. But if I had a SOC2, would you take that instead? If I had ISO, would you take that instead? And again, like really encourage you to have, or try to have this open dialogue with your prospect, hopefully your champion there, so that you get actual like specific relevant information to your deals and your business right now to make this decision. Cool. Okay. Gonna pause here, take some more questions. Please drop them in. Let's see if I can find a mouse. Nope. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to stop screen sharing to do that. But okay, Seth, I'm going to hold off on your question. Jim, okay, answer your question. So Jim asks, in your experience, do companies outside the United States accept SOC2 as meeting security requirements? So good question. This gets at SOC2 versus ISO. To just a really, really high level, SOC2 is an American standard, American Institute of CPAs. ISO is a European standard. So to super broadly generalize, American companies prefer SOC2 and European companies prefer ISO. That said, most European companies will accept a SOC2 somewhat begrudgingly because they are so used to interacting with American vendors, and American vendors / kind of global vendors, honestly, like software providers, end up getting a SOC2 first because the American market is just so much bigger. So in my experience, yes, companies outside the US will ask you for an ISO report and then accept your SOC2. And maybe eventually over time, you know, you go both, but we found SOC2 to be the primary thing people ask for. And you might be sitting there and thinking, well, that's neat, Christina, but you know, you're really biased because you have a SOC2 company. And that is true. But I will just say, when we were investigating this world and doing our early product research 3 years ago, we faced this. We're like, should we build a SOC2 automation or should we build ISO automation? And we chose to build SOC2 automation because it just seemed like the fundamentally more useful first standard. So yes, biased, but hopefully in a way that is like actually illustrative. It's like, face the same question, put my chips on that table, very personally. And then someone anonymous, so sorry, just going back to questions now. Someone anonymous asked about the cost varying and the big range I gave. I'm gonna hold that till we get to the cost section. Hopefully can provide a little more insight there, but agree that it's a big range. And then, great. And then a few of the other questions I'm gonna hold for a little bit, but I will come back to. Cool. And go back into presentation mode. Cool. Okay, great. So key takeaway here, just you want to figure out when circumventing SOC2. So this is filling out questionnaires, sending policies, going back and forth, whatever, kind of becomes more expensive than the SOC2 itself. Great. Okay. Next question, we'll get into what actually is one of these audits. So I'll give you some, again, kind of similar format to before. I'll give you some philosophy around it, and then I'll like walk you through sort of an example from Vanta's audit and report. So first up, what is, let me just move Windows on top of things. Cool. First up, what is an audit? So again, really high level, a SOC2 audit basically requires you to prove that you do what you say, again, to this auditor. And again, in this case, an auditor might be a CPA, but you should also just think of the auditor as like a rigorous third party who's gonna, kind of be professionally skeptical, right? In some ways, that is what accountants do. So during an audit, an auditor will come in and say, hey, show me the list of all the things you do. Right? So if you think about the actual report, it's like all the stuff in the table. Like, show me your security practices, or tell me what they are first. Then they're going to say, okay, great. Thank you for your list of security practices. Now we're going to go down the list together, and I want to see that you follow each of them. And again, you can try to just tell me you say them, but I'm a professionally skeptical person, so I want to see more than just words. Like, I want to see proof. I want to see evidence. So you sort of go down the list. And so sometimes they will ask questions of key employees. So they'll say, well, CEO, that's nice you think you do that, but I want to go talk to the person who actually onboards employees and ask them if they onboard people, because you're too far away. So they'll go, talk to that person. They'll sometimes ask for screenshots of configuration dashboards. So again, they'll say, CEO, understand you think you encrypt all your databases. That's cool. Understand the head of engineering, the CTO, thinks that happens too. Cool. I want to see it in AWS. Like, pull up the AWS dashboard and show me that all your databases are encrypted. And take that screenshot and send it to me so I have like an artifact that this happens. Even to visit your office. So this is what people talk about when they talk about like a paper trail or collecting evidence. But really, again, like fundamentally, you just need to, for your list of 100 things, show this skeptical person that you do them. Process tends to take a few weeks of kind of dedicated time and paperwork, going back and forth saying, hey, how about this? Oh, will you accept this piece? Oh, you want to do more than just talk to the person who onboards someone. You want to see a sample onboarding checklist that's been completed for one employee. Okay, well, our new employee's onboarding next week. We'll send you the checklist then, whatever it is. But it's sort of this negotiation across all of this, so you can see what's going on. So that's just kind of the philosophy and somewhat of the high level. So I'm going to go now into the snapshot of Vanta's SOC2 report. So earlier, I talked about there being like 15 pages of tables. Here's a half a page example of one of the tables. So you can see, without getting too much into all the jargon here, the gray rows are called controls. Just kind of the security and compliance word. I think the common word that's a little easier is commitments, right? And so just reading the last one, again, these are all a little jargony, but the entity communicates with external parties regarding matters affecting the functioning of internal control. So trying to translate this a bit, this is saying the entity, Vanta the company, tells external parties, probably customers, what's going on when or matters affecting the functioning of the internal control. So what's going on with our internal practices and when something might be off, right? So we're saying Vanta tells customers what's going on and when something might be off. So that's our control. And then underneath, so kind of the white rows are sort of control activities and compliance speak. In Vanta speak, they're tests, but they're like ways to prove. Basically, the white rows are ways to prove the gray rows. So customer contracts include the communication of the company's commitment to its customers. You can read through these. And so again, when I talk about these big tables, basically this is the stuff. And so for everything in white, your job is to show the auditor evidence you do that. And then the auditor, it's their kind of professional job to say, okay, hey, given what the company showed me for the stuff in white, do I think the thing that's in gray is being upheld, is happening? So that's sort of how this is going on. And then I wanted to do one more piece here, which is to show you how Vanta Inc. met these during our audit. And, unsurprisingly, we use Vanta because it would be, I think, weird if we don't, but, or didn't. So for the first one, this is a lot of the core of what Vanta does. And I don't want to take you through all this because I don't want to subject you to a Vanta feature pitch, but just to kind of show you the range of things here. So we use Vanta for that. Use Vanta for the second thing, can use other tools too. Datadog is our log management tool. So there was some Datadog work in there. We kept records of security training, and the purple boxes are Vanta things. They're like, you know, we built a thing that helped us do that. Got policy documents for some pieces, update emails to customers, showing auditor samples of those. Drew a network diagram. It is the same one engineering uses to onboard new engineers, but show that. SLAs and contracts, pull those up. And then contracts with vendors and specific clauses in them. So again, probably very hard or impossible to map, you know, kind of everything that's going on in this slide, but really I just wanted to put those boxes on there to give you a sense for, you know, when I talk about evidence or proving stuff to auditors, like what sort of tools one might use to do that, or just like how one might do that. So this is the quick version of what an audit is. I'm going to pause here, look at a few questions, and then we'll keep going on how you get an audit and how much it costs, which sounds like it's a popular question. So one moment as I look at questions. Great. Great, okay. Okay, cool. So someone anonymous asked, are these audits done in person or can they be done remotely? So a two-part answer. One, during COVID, I think they're all being done remotely, because SOC2s are definitely still happening with and without Vanta. Non-COVID answer is it depends. And it mostly depends, well, it depends on two things. One, it depends on your audit firm. So there are some firms, and honestly, like the big four, the names, the household names you probably know, really, really, really prefer to go on site. There's smaller boutique firms that are more accustomed to working with small companies that sort of get it, don't need to go on site. And by get it, I mean, I don't just mean, you know, big companies are slow sort of thing. I mean that the other thing this depends on is what your controls are. So what commitments are you making? And if you're making commitments about your office, the auditor's gonna come into your office and see that your commitments are upheld. If you don't make commitments about your office, they probably don't need to come in. So one just really clear example of this, and I know this is, you know, in some ways will just sound basic to everyone on the call, but is cloud infrastructure, right? And so in a cloud infrastructure world, your servers, your customer data is not sitting at your office. Like they're in AWS's data centers or whoever's. And so, and you know, there's different controls around that. And so the way an auditor would think about, would probably not need to go into the office for like a cloud-centric company, unless that company also in pre-cloud had, you know, servers in the closet or big file cabinets of customer data, right? These things that we sort of associate with like the bygone age of 20, 25 years ago. But like if you've got servers in your closet, if you've got file cabinets of customer data, the auditors are gonna wanna come in and see those. If you don't, doesn't need to as much. So they can be done remotely, just depends on the firm you're working with and depends on what controls you have in place or what commitments you're making and whether any of them are literally in your office or require being in your office to check out. Great. Oh, good. Okay, next question. So that's a good one, an anonymous person. Is this like a static audit where the auditor makes an assessment, or does the auditor help coach the company along and bring them into compliance? So great question. The answer is also a little fuzzy here. So per the letter of the regulations, and maybe backing up, like again, it's the AICPA who does this stuff. So that's the same body that does all the financial accounting. And 20 years ago, after Enron, those rules got a lot stricter. So the written rules here are quite strict. And they are the auditor should not help coach the company. Like the auditor is an objective third-party assessor who comes in, looks at what he or she has presented, uses their professional judgment, makes an assessment, writes it up, says thank you so much. This is not quite always what happens in practice, not in a malicious way. But again, depends on the firm you're working with. Some firms have offer professional services, basically, in addition to the audit. So they call this readiness assessment, where they will sort of charge in two parts. They will say, hey, step one, we're gonna charge you making $10,000 to $25,000 for a readiness assessment. So we'll come in and basically help you make your table. They won't say it that way, but like we'll help you set your controls. We'll help you think through how you can improve them. Like we're good at this. We do this a lot. We'll help you with it, right? And so you pay them and you get your table, and they help you kind of put things in place. Then there's a separate engagement, sometimes with separate people, sometimes not. That's like, okay, now we're actually going to audit it. And so this is where it gets a little fuzzy, but the regulations are pretty strict. And where it gets gray, it's around sort of recommendations and advice that an audit firm can provide. But they are not supposed to implement the controls. So they can suggest things you do, but they should not do them for you. That's pretty verboten. So that's sort of the line with auditors. The other piece here is there's other entities that do the readiness thing. So security consultants will do it, like engineers, people who've done this at other companies, like people with no ties to CPA firms totally do readiness work. Because sort of as this question implies, and you might see, there's a lot that goes into one of these audits. So having someone guide you through it actually ends up being pretty helpful. Even if it costs extra dollars, it ends up saving a ton of time. So let's see, next question. Does Vanta help with gap analysis, specifically identifying which controls are relevant and identifying the appropriate tests to put in place prior to proceeding to an audit? Love this question. This is one of our big value props. So yes, and just tying it back to like what an auditor does. I won't pitch Vanta very much, but sort of pitch here is like, hey, we'll help you with the gap analysis. We'll help you get set up. We'll help you get things in place. We'll monitor it so you know what it's doing, collect evidence, and we can give it to an auditor. And so the auditor can focus on their job, which is like assessing what's going on, and you're in a good space, security and compliance wise. Great, and then Rahul asks, what's the cadence for auditing in order to be SOC 2 compliant? Also, how do you verify if a company is breaking compliance rules post-audit? Great question. So the cadence for auditing for SOC 2 compliant is annually. Audits, and again, these are PDFs, right? And it's not like the PDF explodes on day 366. Like you still have your PDF, but it has the dates on it. And sort of the enforcement mechanism here is people, like startups, don't like to send out old PDFs because it makes them look cheap. And buyers and prospects don't like to receive old PDFs because they wonder, like, what is going on over there? Don't those people know that, like, it's old? Like, what's going on? So the cadence is annual. The enforcement is sort of social pressure versus, exploding PDFs or something. But that's sort of how that works. And then how do you verify if the company is breaking compliance rules post-audit is another near and dear question to my heart. So when, and I'm obscuring some parts of SOC 2 audits, but basically there's not much. Like an auditor can ask for screenshots over a period of time, or ask for evidence over a period of time and say, hey, I got monthly screenshots. So I feel pretty good that things are in place all the time, but sort of you don't fundamentally know. And my favorite example of this, just because it's so viscerally clear, is Equifax, which definitely had a SOC 2. And their SOC 2 definitely said they had a good vulnerability management program that was secure and like blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure it was when the audit took place. But 2 months later, when the auditor came in, or rather when there was no auditor, their vulnerability management place was not very good. And now everybody's social security and credit information has been out for a few years. So it's not super great, honestly. To be very empathetic to auditors are people, right? So there's just limits to what they can check and how often they can check it. And even, the most superhuman of auditors are still fundamentally people. And so this is where kind of automation and continuous monitoring and like whether it's Vanta or another tool, I think it's just can be very meaningful. Because whereas, again, the most superhuman of people could check a control, I don't know, weekly, and daily for 100 of them. It's really easy to write code to ask AWS to, check if a database is encrypted every 30 seconds. And it can, the computer will just happily do that forevermore. So I think automation has a big role to play here. Again, Vanta related or otherwise. Cool. Okay. I'm going to pause on questions for a moment so we make sure we get through. We definitely get to the cost stuff because it seems like a hot button issue. Sorry, gonna have to sit through the boxes again. Great. Okay. So how do you get a SOC 2 audit? Again, it's a little simplified, but 2 steps here. Step 1, get audit ready. So this is write your list of controls, the rules you're following. These are sort of the gray and white boxes in that table. Ensure your rules are followed, that you're following them, you have been following them, and ensure you can prove this, that you have some sort of documentation that is better than, the CEO said that everything is in good shape. So once you're there, you can engage an auditor. So then you review the list of controls with an auditor and you prove to the auditor you're following each rule. So hopefully this follows from some of the stuff we're talking about. Rather than pausing here, I'm going to move to cost, which again sounds popular. So big range in cost. I gave the 10 to 80K. That's big. So I broke down, so this table breaks down a few of the big buckets and then ranges in each bucket. So first row, this readiness assessment. Again, this is like, what the heck do we even need to be doing? You can totally do this research project internally. It's not super fun. Generally, people don't like this project, but it is not, so insurmountable as to be impossible. But often companies decide, hey, we could do the research project, but it's actually better to pay 10, 20K to a consultant, maybe an auditor, maybe a former auditor, maybe my former, security colleague from my prior job at Dropbox, whatever, and have them do this for us. So then second row, there's like a tool, there could be a tool purchasing step, right? This is, hey, we're gonna have to, we don't background check our employees, but we think we should say we do, so we gotta start. There's, hey, all the laptops have customer data or access to customer data, so we wanna encrypt those hard drives. We could ask every employee to encrypt the hard drive and take screenshots and prove it that way, but like, I'd rather just pay $50 a month for laptop software, whatever it is. Third row, other prep work. Hey, we want to write a bunch of policies. We need to write down a bunch of the stuff we're doing. Again, someone internally could do it. They could Google. There's policy examples online. They're good, but this just isn't often the most compelling project for anyone's business. So you can outsource that. You can do it in-house, range there. Then there's the audit itself, which 10 to 50K is a really big range. So to break this down a little bit, at the small end tends to be very small companies, like under 10 people, under 15 people, and they tend to be super prepped and ready. So they have done all of this work in a way the auditor already knows. They can sort of just walk in, look at the evidence and walk out, versus they need to go back and forth and do that sort of negotiation. So that's going to be very small, very prepped and ready companies. And then as your company grows, or as your company is just kind of less far along in its like security journey or compliance journey, the price goes up. The other thing that makes the price go up is if you have custom infrastructure, custom technology. So if you're like a company that's building hardware and you're building, security robots, and the robots are, roaming around and need to be involved, that's cool. But the auditor is going to need to take time to like understand your security robots and then audit them. And they're kind of going to implicitly charge you for that ramp up time. Versus if you come to them and like you're just on Heroku, they're like, cool, I understand Heroku, understand what to do, we can rock and roll. So those are the sort of things that kind of change the price here. Let's see, and then there's also kind of different types of audits. I don't really want to get into this, but if you've heard of type 1 and type 2 audits, sort of one is a 1-day audit, one is a 6-month audit, that also changes the price. I think maybe another framework to think through the audit cost is, even though the auditor bills like one price up front, like this isn't an hourly rate, it's a one price up front. they have basically computed their hourly rate to get to this one price, right? And these audit firms, I mean, CPA firms are fundamentally services businesses. So if it takes them more time to audit you for whatever reason, you're larger, you have custom infrastructure, you're not ready, something, they will try to charge you more. And if you're take them not very much time, they hopefully will pass on some of that cost savings to you. If that makes sense. So gonna actually just one more, again, brief Vanta pitch. Somebody asked kind of what parts does Vanta help with? We try to help with kind of all this prep stuff, give you tools, give you policies, get you controls, get you ready. And then we partner with auditors on the other side who are used to Vanta audits. And so it's sort of like, hey, this company is ready. They have the stuff. You'll be familiar with a lot of it. This shouldn't take you, this should not be one of the more complicated audits you do. So that's sort of the Vanta version of this. I'm going to pause and take questions about cost. I imagine there will be a few. Oh, can you make your slide deck available to participants? Totally. Yeah, work with Maureen to figure out how to do that.
Yes, we will definitely share that along with the record.
Yeah. Okay, about 20 minutes ago, anonymous attendee, what size of companies do companies usually get their first SOC 2, either by revenue or number of employees? So sort of related, but kind of going back to the, cost of not having a SOC 2, like opportunity cost versus cost, like this slide is the cost you want to use, if that makes sense. So when you're thinking through, well, kind of look at this and, hey, we're going to spend on readiness assessment, but we'll write our own policies. We're not going to buy tools, whatever. An audit will cost us 20K. How does that compare to what this prospect is? So it's again, that spreadsheet math. And then I'd say number of employees. So actually surprisingly, again, across all the Vanta customers, it's not a very good proxy. So we have helped a ton of like 2- and 3-person companies, like a surprising number to me. But these 2- or 3-person companies needed bank relationships to get off the ground, and they couldn't get a bank relationship without a SOC 2. So again, like the best predictor here is who are your customers and what are they asking you for? And if it's a big financial institution, you're going to get a SOC 2 early. And if you're a like bottoms up team collaboration tool, like Dropbox Paper or Notion, you're going to push it for a bit because you can, because you don't need, like, this isn't a blocker. You got other stuff to do. Cool. Jason, why Vanta versus all the competitors? So I could go on this for a while, but I don't want to subject you to it. But the short version is we are the first mover in this space. We have the most built out from a technology perspective. So the reason that's important to you is you get more automation with us. Like you have to do less work. You still have to do work, working on bringing that down. I want that with anyone else. But a more mature product is just helpful to you because it takes care of more for you. And then the other piece of scale that's really nice is the customer piece. Like you're not our first customer, you're not our 10th customer, you're not our 500th customer, you're not our 500th audit. We've gotten pretty good at this over the last few years. And so can help people through even faster. Cool. And then, okay, someone else asked, for SOC 2 Type 2, is there an ongoing cost to use Vanta? So there is, or like we're cloud SaaS and have a SaaS model. And cost you can think of in 2 ways. One is general security monitoring. Hopefully it helps to know if all your databases are in good shape all the time so you don't become an Equifax, not just during your audit. And then the second piece is, again, these audits are annual. So like, even if you, I don't know, started and canceled a Vanta contract, you'd be like turning it on and off twice a year. And we sort of were just like, seems silly. You probably just want to keep this thing running in the background. Cool. Jason, technology differentiators versus competitors. Yeah, quite a few. Ping me after and I can give you a list, but I think of the product as more than just a foot race, but even if you think of it as a foot race, we've got about a year or 2 on pretty much anyone else. We've seen a lot of competitors start as almost services businesses. So we'll write you policies, we'll give you a gap assessment, and then over the last year pivot into providing more automation, because there's a lot of value for that, for customers, for general security, and for auditors, honestly. But happy to give you a full rundown if you email me. Cool. Just last bit, how much faster will your deals close with SOC2? This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but I do actually kind of think of a SOC2 as your monopoly, like pass go and collect $200 card. Again, kind of going back to the beginning and the philosophy around SOC2. It's a way to say, like, hey, I got regional security, someone checked it out, you can trust me, you can read my 50 pages of tables, like, I got stuff for you here. And so that should short circuit longer security conversations with your big prospects. There's other, I don't want to paint this as like the totally end all be all amazing thing. I mean, I think it's pretty good, but I think it's pretty good. There's more certifications after SOC2. You might not be done with just a SOC2. Sounds like some of you in the audience have gone through other certifications, but really do think SOC2 is an excellent place to start. And again, I'm biased, but sort of chose to start a company around this thing because I believed it was such a good place to start versus anything else. So with that, Maureen, let me know if we have any more time. I mean, we're coming up on time. I don't know how you want to handle this.
About
but
3 minutes left. So last round of questions.
Cool. We'll do last round of questions. Oh, okay. Anonymous attendee, cost for team with all the right controls, just needs platform help, under 10 people. How much in Vanta? So we're still in sort of obscure pricing mode, but if you email sales at Vanta or email me and say, hey, give me your best deal, and I was on the Twist podcast, you'll get our best deal on the Twist podcast. And you're like, and to try to be a little more specific, like, again, there's a little bit going on here, but like, you're not looking at probably any more than $12,000 here. You're looking at under that. But make sure you let us know you're on the Twist podcast because we'll discount more. My email is Christina at Vanta, Christina with the CH at Vanta.com. How long does it take to do the gap analysis for a small SaaS company on the cloud? In a non-Vanta world, if you work with someone who knows what they're doing, it shouldn't take them that long. Should take them, gosh, I'm committing other people who don't even know I'm committing them to things, which is always a good thing to do. Probably 20 hours. So sort of the back and forth will be, they'll come to you and say, hey, you know, you want to secure customer data. How are you doing that today? Okay, how does this sound? How does that sound? What about this? Can you commit to doing this? And so where the hours sort of rack up is sort of in the horse trading of figuring out how much you can reasonably upgrade your practices, given where you are engineering team wise, bandwidth wise, maturity wise, all of that. So that's where the time comes in. And again, this is someone kind of good who can come in and say, hey, I understand SOC2. I've gone through 100 of these. Like, I got a baseline idea. I just need to apply it to your company. Vivek, if you're a SaaS startup but do not connect or collect PII, do most enterprises still care if you're SOC 2 compliant? So unfortunately, kind of yes. So this gets into how much back and forth you want with your prospect, and if you want to kind of argue with them. The unfortunate part is a lot of these bigger companies have vendor management processes themselves that are sort of rigid, and these things say, hey, get a SOC 2 from everyone no matter what. If you're selling to technology companies or savvier companies, they might, recognize we don't actually need this. There's no PII, but it's sort of hit or miss depending on how savvy your buyer is. Thank you all so much for logging on and asking great questions. It was really fun.